President Trump targeting Arizona's junior Republican Senator Jeff Flake, though not by name, during last night's rally. Take a listen.
Nobody wants me to talk about your other senator, who's weak on borders, weak on crime, so I won't talk about him. Nobody wants me to talk about him. Nobody knows who the hell he is.
Mr. Trump more explicit today, deciding to name Flake in a tweet, stating, quote, "Phoenix crowd last night was amazing. I packed house. I love the great state of Arizona, but not a fan of Jeff Flake, weak on crime and border." Joining me now to discuss Trump's criticism of Republicans, including Jeff Flake as well as John McCain, and the alleged feud with Senate Leader Mitch McConnell, Ed Rollins, who served in 3 presidential administrations, was the chief political advisor to the House Republican leadership, and is, after all, just the dean. We love Ed.
Thank you.
So Jeff Flake, first of all, the guy just went on a book tour. He wrote an entire book lambasting Donald Trump. Why should Donald Trump like the guy?
Well, I think he went above and beyond the pale. I mean, obviously you can vote against him from time to time, which a lot of senators will do, but you basically clearly show that your philosophy and the president's philosophy are not one and the same. So I think there'll be a lot of people who aren't going to support, be a primary certainly there, and I think to a certain extent the Republican obviously endorse senators, so Senator McConnell will be fighting hard. But I think the president eventually will be on the other side of some of this. Let's
talk about Senator McConnell, because that's the big elephant in the room here.
Sure.
McConnell just came out with this New York Times. Well, the New York Times came out with a piece about McConnell, but it's clear that the information in there came directly from McConnell. The headline is "McConnell in private doubts if Trump can save the presidency," and it really blast after blast at the president that he was elected to serve. I know you're elected to serve the people, but as the Senate, the majority leader in the Senate, you're supposed to put through the president's agenda. But he says time after time in this article, Mr. McConnell has mused about whether Mr. Trump will be in a position to lead the Republican Party in the next year's elections and beyond. Mr. McConnell expressed horror to advisors after Mr. Trump's comments equating white supremacists in Charlottesville with protesters who rallied against him. On and on and on. He's taking his points from the mainstream media. How can you work with this guy?
Well, he's been the opposition leader, even though they had a majority to President Obama, and he was pretty effective at that. I think at this point in time, he's got to help push this president's agenda forward, and I think it's just...
But it looks like he's trying to undermine it.
There's no question he is, and certainly the quotes that are in there are from his staff. They're not from the White House, and I think to a certain extent, he and the president need to sit down, have a one-on-one dinner, or maybe bring their spouses, and say, this is what I want, what do you want, and get some kind of a compromise here and move forward, because we've got a big agenda ahead of us, and if it doesn't have great 100% cooperation from the Senate, it's not going to go anywhere.
You know, it's interesting to hear you say you should bring in the spouse. Elaine Chao is in the president's cabinet. She says she serves both men in her life, both the president and Mitch McConnell, her husband. Do you think she could have any influence?
Well, I think
maybe bending McConnell to Trump's way?
I think she's going to be in charge of the infrastructure as Secretary of Transportation. She's been a labor secretary. She's been now the transportation secretary. She's been the deputy. She's a very able person in her own right. And I think to a certain extent, I think if you have the wives in the room, basically at least come to an agreement, and there's witnesses to the agreement, and I think you need to move forward.
You know, something else in this New York Times piece, it essentially admits, and again, one assumes this is Mr. McConnell or his staff talking. Mr. McConnell, and I'm reading here, signaled to business leaders that he was deeply uncomfortable with Mr. Trump's comments, several of whom resigned from the advisory roles. Mr. McConnell fully understood their choices to resign. I mean, he is actually trying to undermine the help that the president was getting from the business community.
Well, what he'll quickly learn is that in his own home state of Kentucky, Mr. Trump is more popular than he is. He has terrible numbers at this point in time. He's not up for a period of time. But he needs, as the majority leader, to basically move this agenda forward. And whether it's Trump's or McConnell's agenda, it should be one and the same. At the end of the day, he's got to put it together, make it work, and the president's got to sell it.
By the way, as we mentioned, Jeff Flake, Senator Jeff Flake from Arizona, is going into an election in 2018. His opponent will be in the primary is Dr. Kelly Ward, a physician who is running for his office in the primary. You have a PAC that's supporting Dr. Ward.
my PAC was the Great America PAC, which is the largest supporting of President Trump, and we pledged to basically do everything we could to help the president move his agenda forward. So obviously, because of the book, we realized that the senator's never going to be on Trump's side.
And do you think Dr. Ward is going to win?
I think she's a viable candidate. She got 39% running against McCain, who was very popular a couple years ago. So I think she's going to be a very strong candidate.